Good morning, News Talk 1330 WLBP. Adam Uglum here in the newsroom. It's 8:31. Time for the Community Voice program. I'm hosting the program today. It's my first week officially back into semi-regular scheduled programming as far as my political rants go into the Community Voice as part of your weekly political insight from Adam Uglum. Really going to pick up the topic from Monday. Monday somehow became this long diatribe about my personal political beliefs. We had a couple of week break where we had a lot of scheduled folks in for the Community Voice and just didn't talk politics for quite a while. I did miss it, and I enjoyed Monday's program, even though I did very much put myself out there, and I don't mind that. That's kind of my job, is to put myself out there, because many of you are in fields where you can't put yourself out there, or in family situations where you can't put yourself out there, and few of us have the ability to do so, and I do enjoy it. It's been interesting so far. It's certainly changed friendships, that's for sure, being a political talk show host and being extremely outspoken about politics, and especially philosophy and economics. People get very, 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 very passionate about all of those topics. But today we're going to bring things a little bit more down to earth. As opposed to talking about just political philosophy in general, we're going to get to more real-world scenarios when it comes to this type of thing. And the first thing I'd like to address is kind of the morality. As flexible as morality is, we have to talk about the moral case for capitalism and small government, because it's interesting that when you talk about morality and capitalism, the response from most people, and generally it is those who are on the left who make this response, that that's kind of an oxymoron. You can't be moral and capitalist at the same time, but to the contrary, I believe. We know that in the modern world, the U.S. and most other developed nations are in awfully deep trouble when it comes to their fiscal state, and maybe even their social state as well. I won't go down that path, but if we leave the government, especially our government and European government, on autopilot, on the continued path that they're on, we all know the painful day of reckoning will arrive eventually. And we know that if the United States continues this George W. Bush, President Obama era of expanding the burden of the public sector, that the future looks pretty dim for the United States. All of this sounds awfully depressing, but the good news is that we know what does work. The problem is that we have to convince people what it is that works. And it's awfully difficult to convince people of that, because it's something that has seldom been practiced in the global sphere or in the historical sphere when it comes to good governance. Part of the answer is that libertarians and small government conservatives are probably too utilitarian. Not necessarily in our hearts. That's not a bad thing to be too utilitarian, but in the way we address or explain the issue. Here's an excerpt from an article that I read in American Enterprise addressing this problem. Many who strongly believe in free enterprise steer clear of all public moral arguments. This is a mistake and a missed opportunity. A great deal of research shows that people from all walks of life demand a system that is morally legitimate, not just efficient. Privately, a free enterprise's champions celebrate capitalism because they believe that succeeding on merit, doing something meaningful, seeing the poor rise by their hard work and virtue, and having control over life are essential to happiness and fulfillment. But in public debate, conservatives often fall back on capitalism's superiority to other systems just in terms of productivity and economic efficiency. The reliance on these materialistic arguments is a gift to statists, to those on the left. It allows them to paint free enterprise advocates as selfish and motivated only by money. Those who would expand the government have successfully appropriated the language of morality for their own political ends. Redistributionist policies they have claimed to great effect are fairer and kinder and more virtuous. Average Americans are thus too often left with two lousy choices in the current policy debates: the moral left versus the materialistic right. The public hears a heartfelt redistributionist argument from the left that leads to the type of failed policies that we have today, but sometimes it feels as if the alternatives come from the morally bereft conservatives who were raised by wolves and don't understand basic moral principles. There just doesn't seem to be a good alternative to the status quo, and as a consequence, the country is slipping towards a system that few people actually like. Now, this reminds me, this article, that a very sad but true statement that Democrats are evil and Republicans are dumb. And I think it speaks volumes that Republicans have the right ends in mind, but they don't necessarily know how exactly to get there. Most libertarians and conservatives aren't motivated by gross domestic product, I don't think. Not in our hearts. We believe in small government because it's morally sound. Articulating why it's morally sound may be the more difficult part. And fairness is awfully subjective too. But in capitalism, you don't get wealthy without offering something of value. There's no stealing. There's no force under capitalism. What we think of capitalism today is warped by our modern-day lens that we have, our modern-day worldview. It's been changed. What many people think of capitalism is what is often referred to as corporatism, or cronyism, as it's often called by the underground libertarians, the more nut-wing types. It really is painful to hear capitalism called evil, when there's not a darn thing that's evil about it at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's the most moral thing in human history. The concept of voluntary exchange, there's nothing more moral than voluntary exchange. That is what capitalism is, in a nutshell. If you don't get your argument across using the word capitalism, just remind whoever it is you're talking to what capitalism is. And what capitalism really is voluntary exchange. It is not the economy that Alexander Hamilton set out for us in his report on manufacturing under George Washington. He set up a state-based economy that promoted a certain end. Public policy debates, though, we often rely on utilitarian arguments. And much like many economists whom I read, I offer myself as an example when I discuss the idea of fair taxes or flat taxes. Now, in the 1990s, I think thanks to Steve Forbes, the flat tax became a legitimate talking point. It was a topic of conversation that's disappeared, which is bothersome, but it was a big issue in the 1990s, and tax reform was a big, big topic. It's very easy to make very dry and technical arguments about marginal tax rates and capital formation and gross domestic product growth and things like that, but we have to realize that much of the motivation, at least from our heart, from our inside, the reason we like these things, us conservatives and libertarians, why we like flat taxes and fair taxes, is because we're all motivated by a belief in a fair and moral system. No cronyism, no nepotism, no treating people differently. Us conservatives and libertarians, we want to treat everybody equally under the law. We want to end corruption. We want to shut down loopholes. And it's a goal that many people can find common ground on. And to me, as I mentioned on Monday, discrimination is not something that should be done by a government financed by the general public. The government should be completely unbiased to the general public. Law should affect every citizen equally in this country. End of story. I think it's a very basic and very acceptable, very agreeable tenet of good governance that every law should treat everyone equally, whether it be voting rights, whether it be sexual reproductive rights, whatever it is. It should all be equal. Everyone should be equal under the law. And we live in a world where not everyone is equal under the law. And it goes much further than just economic law. But when it comes to tax policy, we all know that in every country, there is no such thing as equality under tax law because we are punished for being successful in this country. And it's something that one day, I hope, changes. I hope in my lifetime we see a trend where people are treated the same under the law, such that we are not divided as a people as to mistreat others simply for a number. We're all people. We're all in this together. There's no reason whatsoever to treat people unfairly under the law based on any social means, based on any economic means, based on any financial means, based on anything. Good governance, in my opinion, starts with everyone being equal under the law. We'll be right back after the break, and we'll talk about some real-world examples of the success of capitalism and why it is better than the rest. It is easy to understand why the law is used by the legislator to destroy in varying degrees among the rest of the people their personal independence by slavery, their liberty by oppression, and their property by plunder. This is done for the benefit of the person who makes the law, and in proportion to the power that he holds. That is Frederick Bastiat, articulating the economic way of thinking and exposing the myths that plague the political debate. of today. Wise well beyond his years, Frederick Bastiat has been long dead. So I come back and we're going to talk a little about why capitalism is and why it's successful, and some real-world examples of what 38 years of difference in governance has done to a couple of different countries. Haiti may be the poorest nation in the Americas, and Cuba may have the dictator with the longest lifespan, but Venezuela arguably has the worst government. Not the Downish dictator Hugo Chavez. He's trying to repeal the laws of economics. Well, how's that working out for him? Quote out of the New York Times. By 6:30 a.m., a full hour and a half before the store would open, about 24 people were already in line. They waited patiently, not for the latest iPhone, but for something far more basic: groceries. Venezuela is one of the world's top oil producers at a time of soaring energy prices, yet shortages of staples like milk, meat, and toilet paper are a chronic part of life in Venezuela, often turning grocery shopping into a hit-or-miss proposition. Some residents arrange their calendars around the once-a-week deliveries made to government-subsidized stores like this one, lining up before dawn to buy a single frozen chicken before the stock runs out, or a couple of bags of flour, or a bottle of cooking oil. The shortages affect both the poor and the well-off in surprising ways. A supermarket in an upscale La Castellana neighborhood recently had plenty of chicken and cheese, even quail eggs, but not a single roll of toilet paper. Only a few bags of coffee remained on the bottom shelf. Asked where a shopper could get milk on a day when that, too, was out of stock, a manager said with sarcasm, "At Chavez's house. At the heart of the debate is President Hugo Chavez's socialist-inspired government, which imposes strict price controls that are intended to make a range of foods and other goods more affordable for the poor. They are often the very products that are the hardest to find. Many economists call it a classic case of government causing a problem rather than solving it. Prices are set so low, they say, that companies and producers can't make a profit, so farmers grow less food or something else. Manufacturers cut back production and retailers stock less inventory. Moreover, some of the shortages are in industries like dairy and coffee, where the government has seized private companies and is now running them, saying it is in the national interest." And that's the end of that quote. Imagine a world. Do you think it is terribly outside of the realm of possibility that Barack Obama says gas prices should be X? Economics 101 tells us that when you set a price ceiling or a price floor, you absolutely change the supply. I'm listening to my mind right now fabricating a speech from Barack Obama saying that gas prices must be $3 a gallon. And the lines at the gas station will be endless. So we look at Venezuela, one of the worst governments in the world, one of the most corrupt, one of the most socialist, one of the most communist governments in the world. And we look at 38 years of progress. What is the inflation-adjusted gross domestic product per capita in Venezuela? Well, in 1980, that number was 10,000 even. In 2008, that number was just over 10,000 even. It hardly moved at all. One of the strictest, most statist governments in the world, and has been for almost 40 years. Let's take a look at Argentina, slightly less corrupt, slightly less communist, slightly less socialist. If you look at the gross domestic product per capita in Argentina, inflation-adjusted U.S. dollars, it was $8,000 in 1980. How is it after 28 years? It's now almost 11,000. It's gone up by 30% in 30 years. Let's take a look at Chile. Chile, who once was a very, very militarized state. One country, one of the very few South American countries who has taken huge market reforms towards capitalism and away from statism. Chile, 30 years ago, in 1980, had just shy of $6,000 in inflation-adjusted American dollars per capita gross domestic product. That number today is more than double. It's just over $13,000 per capita gross domestic product. Now, again, there go those numbers again. Those numbers we talk about when we talk about fairness. How it's about the dry statistical reasoning why capitalism is better. But capitalism is better for far more than numbers reasons. It's better for moral reasons. It's better for humanity reasons. It's better because it's better in every aspect. Utopia, heaven, our final resting place, is not reserved for this world. It is reserved for the next. Trying to create it here by the use of military force, by the use of police force, will never make heaven a reality on earth. Quite the contrary, actually. It will do quite the opposite. The larger the state, the worse off the people have been. History tells us this, and we know that going down this path leads to one thing: revolution. How the revolution takes place, no one knows. At least for us. I think in France we might know, or in Europe we may know, but America is different. Revolution will be quite different. Thomas Jefferson actually called for revolution every 20 years. Now we dissect that. Did he mean an American revolution every 20 years where we fought off our overbearing government with rifles? I don't think so. Honestly, I don't. I think Thomas Jefferson meant revolution at the ballot box. I really do. He and James Madison, Sam Adams, they all gave their lives to create this country. They lived through the revolution. I doubt they wanted to see that again. So they gave us the tools with which to have a revolution and not shed a single drop of blood. Back after the break. Just about 8 minutes left in the program. The telephone number is 678-601-8255. Again, that is 678-601-TALK. If you'd like to call and make a comment. With only a few minutes left, there's only a couple of things I'd really like to talk about before we go. And that is that history is a clear indicator of... It's the clearest indicator. I won't say it's absolutely clear, but it is a much more clear indicator than all others of the success of public policy. So let's consider the historical record. The nations that have tried this type of stimulus, this big government promotion of the economy, has not fared well. The big spending increase under Hoover and Roosevelt failed in the 1930s. Japan, how Paul Krugman has never looked at his own research, I don't understand. Japan tried several Keynesian economic stimulus packages, and that failed throughout the 1990s. Japan's 1990s is commonly known as the lost decade. And where is Japan today? They are in no better shape than they were 22 years ago. And they spent trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars trying to stimulate the economy. Bush's stimulus failed in 2008. Obama's stimulus failed in 2009. Germany didn't go with the big government program of spending, and they did better than the United States as far as economic growth and unemployment goes. The same is true about Canada. But the real success story in recent history when it comes to government economic policy is the Baltic nations. They imposed real spending restraint, not the fake austerity found in places like the United States and the United Kingdom. They didn't lie about spending restraints like Greece did or Italy. They didn't call for higher taxes on the upper class and lower taxes for the middle class. It's very simple. If you look at gross domestic product growth in the 21st century, even through the real estate bubble burst, it's very easy to look at who is doing it right. On this particular list, France is the lowest at 40% per capita GDP growth. The United States, not much better than France, about 44% or so. Germany, a little better, closer to 50%. Sweden, getting on up there around 60%. Hong Kong, one of the freest states in the world, had 100% economic growth in the 21st century, even through the real estate bubble burst. Latvia, here we get to the Baltic nations. Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, all over 100% gross domestic per capita growth in the decade 2000 to 2011. Latvia grew just shy of 120% in per capita GDP. Estonia grew just over 120%, and Lithuania grew almost 130% in per capita gross domestic product. The reason being, they had seriously legitimate and I'm sure hard to do, spending restraints. They have had extremely strong growth compared to the more Keynesian attempts at revitalizing the economy. They even grew faster than countries who compared to them more evenly. They grew faster than Greece by almost double. They grew faster than Uruguay by about 30% and about 20% faster than Thailand. This isn't just a cherry picking of nations here. You can compare them to industrialized nations. You can compare them to other middle income nations. But what matters is the percent growth. We have example after example after example, numbers-wise. And that's the problem, is that numbers-wise doesn't seem to do very well. Maybe it's because people are dumb and don't know what numbers mean. I don't know. And maybe numbers are just hard to understand. I'm not positive. Maybe people just think it can't work here, like the successful reforms in Singapore for their healthcare system that's driven costs down to a trivial amount. Singapore has universal healthcare coverage and spends a fifth of what the United States does. There are things we can learn from other countries. The problem is owning ourselves up to our problems and changing it. We can make a completely secular or non-secular case for everything that is completely moral when it comes to the modern sphere of politics, both socially, economically, and we're going to need both when it comes down to it. We're going to need both, the numbers portion and the morality portion of it, because I don't think one or the other is enough. Because if you convince someone that it's morally proper to do this, you're going to have to prove it with numbers. Now, if you convince someone that this is the best way to do things because of the outcomes, you're going to have to prove to them that it's also morally superior as well, because you need both to have a popular policy. You need both. It has to be morally superior and numerically superior at the same time. It's a difficult battle to fight, my friends, but it's one worth fighting. That I absolutely promise you. Hope you enjoyed the program. I'll be back in this seat on Friday. Check out the website, libertariat.wordpress.com. I also have a YouTube channel, The Libertariat, all one word. And you can, of course, email me, libertariat@gmail.com, for comments, discussions for future shows, questions, criticisms, all of the above can go to any of these locations. My YouTube channel at The Libertariat. Email address, libertariat@gmail.com. Hope you enjoyed the program. We will catch you in here next Friday. It is just shy of the top of the hour. National headlines coming up. Local news after the top of the hour.